Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. We have another Quiltmas in July video tutorial for you today. This time we have a brand new pattern that you can make either in mug rugs or in a full quilt. Because we're doing so much this month with tutorials, I just made the mug rug set and we do have kits available for that. We also have quilt kits and a digital image so you can kind of preview what it'll look like for the lap size that would use all the fabrics that are in this really cool line that we got from Paintbrush Studios called Oh What Fun. It is printed here in the US. Most fabrics are not printed here in the US. They're printed elsewhere, so it's pretty rare. And it's so adorable and it's perfect for this type of application. We're going to be making a set of ornament blocks, and to me they look like vintage ornaments where you have like the ribbon going across the center. And so it's great for showing off and fussy cutting those fabrics. They're so fun, and we're going to use scrappy binding for them. So cute. And you can get them together fairly quickly. It took me about just an hour just to do the tops of the 3 that I did before starting the video. So that goes pretty quickly, but if you're doing it for a big quilt, you might want to start now so you can actually have it done by the holidays, because it is going to take you a little bit of time. It's a little bit more involved than some of our typical quilt blocks, and they're on a smaller scale. It finishes about 8 inches for the quilt block. And so there's a lot of ornaments in your collection. I could also see this being really cool if you saved your Christmas scraps over the years. You could kind of pair the different collections and have little like fabric memories of all the projects that you made over the years for the holidays. I think that would be really fun too. All right, let's get into the tutorial. The pattern, by the way, for this is because it has multiple sizes. We are having this one be a paid pattern. It's the first time we've done a mug rug that's a paid pattern, but it's because we did the math for the mug rugs and a lap, I think a twin and a queen or king size, queen or king. And so it's got all the things. You can do just a little set or you can do the big one. But if you get a kit either for the mug rugs or for the quilt kit, you're going to be able to get that for free. So it'll get added to the cart automatically if you add any of those kits to your cart at checkout, and you can get that pattern for free. Otherwise, if you are just looking and you think this is cool and you want to give it a go and make a quilt or mug rugs, it's just going to be $12 for that pattern, because we do get everything tech edited to make sure everything is correct for you guys and you're not wasting your fabric with bad cutting measurements. So it has been thoroughly vetted. It is ready for you all. All right, let's get into making this together. It's called Ornament Collection. So we're gonna start with our top and bottom of our ornament. So I've fussy cut these so that way the motif that looks very much like a quilt block would be running straight across. If you need a reminder on how to fussy cut, we have a video tutorial on how to do that we did when I came out with my fabric collection, Nocturne. You can apply the principles to things like this as well. It really sort of elevates it a little bit. It does sometimes take a little bit extra fabric, so if you get the mug rug kit, we did include enough extra for you to be able to do something like this, so you too can make it super pretty and just bring it up to that next level. You can actually, this is what it looks like when it's done. You can see how nice that looks with this being centered, and also I centered my little flowers so they would be dead center as well. So it's a little bit extra. You certainly don't have to do it, but if you do, it's super fun and it makes for just a little bit extra pizzazz in your piecing. So we're going to add squares to our sides and stitch down a line in order to create those angles. So the first thing we have to do is draw a line on the wrong side of our fabric, and I'm using a solid so there is no wrong side. What you want to do when you do this is make sure that you're angling your pen in toward the ruler. If it's straight up and down or out, your line isn't going to be in the center. And I've taught enough students in person to know that if your line doesn't go all the way to the points, your eye just likes to follow it. So you're not going to end up being where you need to be when you sew. So just take your time at this point, make sure your lines are going straight out to those points, and you'll be good to go. All right, so now we're going to take our fat quarter pieces and we're going to arrange our triangles in the corners. Now you can pin these in place if you want, but this is a really small piece, so if you think you can give it a go without pinning, you certainly can do that, which is what I'm going to do here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to stitch right down this line. You also could stitch like just one needle width to the seam side of that if you find that you're having trouble like staying right on it, because sometimes they can like shrink in just a tad bit if you do that. So either right on or one needle width to the right, like the seam side of this, and that's what's going to eventually create that dimension where we're able to see kind of it's not a curve, obviously it's a half square triangle, but it makes the impression of it when you're looking at it from a distance for a quilt. So for this step, I find it a lot easier to be able to sew where I'm supposed to be if I have my needle in the center position rather than in the 1/4 inch position, which we'll use a little bit later when we are actually sewing our pieces together. All right, so I'm just going right on top of that line, and I just kind of hold my finger to the side there to make sure that it stays right on that point all the way to the end. I'm going to go ahead and chain piece and do the second one. All right, now it's time to do the same thing on the other side. Remember that your lines need to be pointing in toward what will be the top. It's very important, or you're going to have a lopsided ornament. So now we're going to trim off our corners to make our 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to start by lining up the 1/4 inch mark of my ruler right on top of that line that I drew and sewed on. Then I can go ahead and trim, and this creates our 1/4 inch seam, and you can toss these or keep them. Some people really love these little trimmings and sew them on all the time and make little projects out of them. They call them leaders and enders. I have zero desire to do anything with these, so don't feel bad if you toss them or give them to a friend who does like tiny little pieces. All right, now we're going to press our seams open, and I press 99.9% of my seams open. I find it keeps things more true to size and makes things super accurate. And I always get a nice straight seam, especially when I'm working on bias seams like this one. It's just much less likely to get bent out of shape. And it makes it a lot easier to do more intricate quilting too, because you don't have a lot of bulk in your seam allowance when you are getting into those little pointy bits. All right, so I'm going to flip that over, and once I press that seam from the back, I also like to press it from the front. Gets it super flat, especially when paired with a wool pressing mat and an iron that gets really hot like the Oliso. We don't sell either of those things. I'm just recommending them to you because I love them, but they are very cost prohibitive to ship. So we just recommend that you guys grab those on your own. All right, we've got our ornament top and bottom ready to go. Now it's time to move on to our hanger. Now, because the scale of this needs to be relatively thin so that it looks nice in the final look of the ornament, this is the most fiddly part of the entire process because we are dealing with very tiny little seams here. It's no different than a big seam, it's just lots of little ones. So what I did was I did all my ornament hangers at the same time. That way I could just feed them through and chain stitch, and it didn't feel so bad like I was sewing all these teeny tiny pieces together. At this point, I do want to change to my 1/4 inch seam allowance because we are in quilt assembly stage now. And so we want to make sure that is accurate, especially on a block like this because it's so small and you have a lot going on in it. It's easy for things to get too small and not fit together right if your seam allowance is off. I'm going to press this seam open as well. This is going to be a very small piece, so pressing seams open is really critical for this so that it lays nice and flat. Especially since we're going to be putting drinks on it, we want it to be as flat as possible, so I highly recommend pressing seams open for everything. All right, now it's time to start assembling our block. It looks very tall right now, but that's because we have a lot that's going to get taken up in seam allowances once we get everything sewn together. What I like to do is sew everything into sets of 2, so these rows are going to go together. these rows and these rows, and then we're going to start joining from there. The only seam that we're going to have to be a little bit careful on to make sure that the ornament hanger ends up in the right place is when we're joining these two in a little bit. So I will show you in detail how to do that, but from here we're just joining a bunch of rows, and that's pretty simple. I don't pin this because it's so small, but if you feel like you need to, please go right ahead. All right, so you can see it's already gotten a little shorter just by sewing those 3 seams together. At this point is where I'm going to go over in detail how to make sure that all this lines up. You can see that it looks like this is wider than here, but once we get our 1/4 inch seam in place, it's going to meet right at the same point. So that way it looks like your ornament goes straight up into that hanger and it all meets perfectly. Now I eyeballed this because I have been sewing for 15 years and I can do that, but I'm going to show you how to mark it so that way you know it's going to be right if maybe this is your first go at it. So I'm going to flip both of my blocks over and I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to align that 1/4 inch mark even with the edge of my fabric. Now making sure to angle my pen in so that I'm marking right at the edge of that ruler. I am marking right across where that seam is. That's exactly where my 1/4 inch is and where it should, in theory, be meeting this section above. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Let me flip it over so I can see a little better where everything is supposed to be. Now this gives me a great visual because right where these points are, where I marked a 1/4 inch away, and right where that seam is where that should be meeting exactly. So we're going to pin straight through that. All right, so I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to put it straight through where that mark is going across the seam. And then I'm going to flip this back so that I can see it and I can pin straight through where it's going here as well. That's looking good. See how I got it straight through where that seam allowance is on both sides. Now, if you've done this right, your edges should be nice and even with each other. And I'm going to take and pinch this fabric so that the needle's going straight up and down. If I were to rotate this and pin it, it's going to move my top fabric forward some and my bottom fabric back, and it's not going to be right on top of each other anymore. So what I'm going to do is, while pinching that going up and down so I know that those points are right on top of each other, taking a second pin and going in the right side of that seam allowance. It's going to keep everything together, so when I stitch down here, I can stitch right on that pink mark, know I'm hitting exactly where it is, and I'm going to have a great join. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Now when I sew this together, I'm going to go kind of slow because I want to stitch right across where that line was. That way I know everything is where it should be. Everything's going to look fantastic when it's done. And you'll notice, like I never sew over my pins. I had a needle break once and go straight for my eyeball, and the only thing that saved it was the needle tip was still on the string. So it didn't get all the way there, but it was scary. Never do it again. But I am sewing right up to where this pin is, and that's when I remove it because I want that to stay in place as long as possible. And I do this anytime I've deemed it a good enough seam to pin. And that's what gets me good joints, is just waiting to the very end to pull that pin out, because otherwise you've wasted your time. You pulled your pin out too soon and everything can shift on you. Now rather than press right now, I'm just going to go ahead and stitch the bottom on as well. I don't need a pin for this because it's just a nice straight seam. Now we kind of have a lot going on here with seams going in multiple directions and really close to each other. So I'm making sure to lift and press as I work my way across these seams. That way I'm not going to accidentally press something in the wrong direction and make my coaster or my mug rug not lay flat. You'll notice this one, it's like all seam allowances underneath. This is another reason why I highly recommend pressing your seams open here, because it's still going to lay nice and flat once it's quilted because it just isn't all that bulk. Otherwise, you might have 4 layers of fabric going right underneath here, and that's just going to be a big hump and your drink is going to be all tippy. All right, let's press from the right side. And we're just going to take a moment to admire how well the points are coming up and then going straight up. That is really a great join. I could have smooched it a little bit from one direction to another, but this looks fantastic. I will take it and it will look great. And by the way, I also did fussy cut this llama to be smack in the center. I should have fussy cut him also to make sure I got his feet, but you know, it's okay. It's a mug rug, and we have plenty of other adorable little creatures in here too. All right, we've got our second to last step, and that is attaching our sides so that we have a nice square block. All right, our final step with any block is pressing. But when you're working on a mug rug, it is very important that you take your time with this step and you get it as flat as possible so that, again, your drink doesn't topple over and get coffee all over your adorable little mug rug. Now this is my secret weapon to super flat blocks. So in addition to my felt pressing mat and my Oliso iron, I use spray or just water in my spray mister. We have these in our shop. They are life-changing. I don't like putting water in my iron because I feel like eventually they all spit and get nasty and gross. And Oliso irons are not cheap, and I do not want to have to replace one of these. So what I do instead is I have them in here, and it turns your water into a fine aerosol mist so you don't get any water droplets on there. And it essentially gives you the effect of using steam in your iron, but you're much less likely to distort your block and have it not be square, and it just gets it super, super flat. So from here, you're going to layer and, well, either put your entire quilt top together if you're doing the quilt, but if you're doing the mug rug, you're gonna go ahead and layer and base and quilt. We just use very simple straight lines with a walking foot to do ours, and then we did some scrappy binding. So we took our leftovers and made our scrappy binding from there. And I use this trick that I do sometimes where we glue down the binding with some fusible web. We shared it in a recent video. We can link to it here if you want to take a peek at how I do that. That way, if you do want to stitch, we use a little decorative stitch on this one, a nice little wave. And that way you can stitch in the binding. You don't have to worry about things getting out of place on the back, and you're going to make sure that you catch everything without it looking kind of funky. So I do that. Basically, this is my rule of thumb. If you're going to see the back of it, I like to hand bind it. So quilts, oven mitts that are going to hang over your sides, like your oven, I do that by hand. Anything that is going to be just sitting on a table, I typically like to do that by machine because you're not really, the purpose of this is not to see the back. The purpose of it is to see the front. And so people are not going to be picking it up and looking, they're going to be putting their plate or their drink or their cookie or whatever on it. So I think it's totally fine to go this route and get them done a little bit faster. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial for Ornament Collection. Remember, the pattern will be free if you get the kit for either the mug rug or the lap size quilt kit featuring Oh What Fun by Paintbrush Studios, which is the fabric that we see here. It's super cute, super adorable. And if you get the mug rug, there's enough to fussy cut stuff out. And if you do the lap size one, you're gonna kind of have to take it where it lands because it's like just the right amount of fabric because it works with 11 fat quarters and we have 11 prints. So it's perfect for that. But they're all featured throughout here. So this is a good example of what it kind of looks like. I think it's super adorable. Again, this could also work really well with Scrappy. If you want to showcase all the leftovers that you have from Christmas and holiday projects throughout the years, I think this is a fun one to do it with. Pattern's free if you get either of the kits. If you're going to purchase it on your own, it is paid. It is our only mug rug pattern that's paid, but it's because you are not just getting a mug rug pattern, you are getting multiple sizes so you can turn it into a quilt if you like. So super fun. If you're just doing the mug rugs, it's so fast. You can absolutely do it in a weekend or even just a day if you have the day to just spend on it. If you are doing the quilt, you're going to want to start now. It's a few little pieces, like for this hanger, and you want to make sure that you take your time to pin to get everything where you want it. But it's adorable, it's fun, it will look great on your couch to snuggle up with some cocoa this Christmas. All right, make sure you are staying tuned, because up next we have some quilting videos of some quilting holiday stencils that you can use, and they are super fun and they will elevate your holiday quilting. So that's what's coming up next for our 12 Makes It, well, no, it's not 12 Makes It Christmas. I'm used to doing this in December. Quiltmas in July. So until next time, happy quilting.